Look, I think the reason many senior business leaders are only lukewarm in their support is that it's a fear factor for them. They know that they don't understand enough, and therefore they're afraid of getting too involved because it'll expose what little they know about the issue. So I think the best way to get senior executives and boards better engaged and better supporting cybersecurity efforts is by making it easier for them, by building a common language, helping them to understand the cybersecurity issues in the same way that they understand a lot of other business risk issues. And if you can start to build up that common language, common way of viewing the issues, it'll be a lot easier to break through and get the sort of support that the size of the threat really warrants.
Actually, it surprises me that only 50% of the leaders say that. I think almost every one of us will actually accept that cultural aspects are one of the biggest barriers to achieving proper cybersecurity. So in defense, we have a year of culture, for example, this year, where it's all about security awareness, cybersecurity culture. Don't do stupid things like disclosing your password to somebody who's not known to you, etc., etc. And in terms of silos, one thing we are doing is to see consistency in training, consistency in recruitment, consistency in technology standards, and so on. So we are actually initiating and having a strong governance at the center. We can't avoid, if you want to call it silos, we can call it silos, but we can't avoid it because there are teams in Afghanistan, there are teams in the Middle East, there are teams in Canberra, Sydney, everywhere. Each one has got a responsibility to defend their network, to defend their information. But what we are trying to do is to have a same set of rules by which everybody plays. We want to avoid everybody playing with their own set of rules. As long as everybody plays with the same rule book, we think that we can protect any possible cyber attacks in the same consistent manner.
Well, something we're doing at SunSuper, one of our business strategies is about grow the safe way. And what we've done is with every project we implement, we have a security person in at the ground, at the start, not waiting till the project's 20% through, 30%, 50% through, but bolted in at the beginning with a broad, diverse project team.
I think you've got to get people endorsed in it. So if we look at like anti-patterns of getting people endorsed, maybe asking them to do like a security test once a year, not so good. You know, you sit there and you watch videos for an hour and then you ask questions, or rather you answer questions. Vladimir calls up from Russia and asks for your bank number. Should you give it to him, yes or no? This is what a lot of the traditional security training is. So giving people things that they can relate to. So I love showing people things that make an impact. So someone earlier on the panel just mentioned devices like a Wi-Fi pineapple. This is really cool. It's like, hey, look at this. I can get your phone to talk to this device without you even knowing it, and I can see all the networks you've been to, and now I have all your traffic. Like light bulbs and things go on when you do that. I like showing people my Have I Been Pwned service where they put their email address in, because they suddenly go, hang on a minute, like all of these different companies have had my data and they've leaked it publicly, and they see their information and they get a level of endorsement. I like things like ongoing security programs, phishing campaigns, good example. There's a lot of companies now that do phishing campaigns like all the time. And they will send sample phishing attacks out to staff, and they'll see who manages to sort of spot it as a phish, and then who actually clicks through. So this is now like a living and breathing security program, as opposed to just something that we do and we tick the box and then everybody moves on.
Yeah, so the way we approach this really to talk to the individuals and raise their security awareness is that we get them very much involved in the activity we do around testing, and yeah, just bring it home in terms of statistics as well. So we're currently running some testing around phishing attacks. So get them in and share the results, that's one thing. And then once we re-evaluate that later, they actually can see the progress they make. Another way is to address it to their personal situation, to just bring it home to what do you do in your home to protect your personal email accounts, your setup of security at home, how do you protect your kids in terms of cyber security, and then connect that back to the workplace, because it's pretty much the same.
That's a really good question. If you look at defense organization, defense is run with data. Okay, particularly Australian defense, we are numerically a disadvantaged organization compared to, say, the US defense organization or something. So it's very important that information, I would say information more than data, information is used as a very critical component for our war fighting. Now, to answer your question, there are two things. One is we collect heaps and heaps of data. There's no dearth of data. And we are looking at it from two angles. We have got a program called Enterprise Information Management, whose job is to make sure that we look at all these abundance of data and try to figure out which one is important. So there is actually a team working on how do we prioritize data, which part of the data we collect is very important, and how do we actually ensure that the right amount of data is transferred to the right places. So that is a stock standard information management type activity. The second one is the more important one. How do we make sure that the right people get access to the right data? So we are actually taking a more, I would say, proactive intelligence and a risk-based approach to it than a compliance-based approach. We have come from a culture where everything was compliance-based. We try to restrict as many people from accessing the data as possible. But I think in this day and age, we cannot always have this restrictive compliance-based policy. What we are trying to do is to make it more intelligence-driven. So we do have people who actually collect intelligence about what kind of data can become a threat to this organization. We have got a dedicated insider threat investigation team who actually continuously monitor patterns to make sure whether there is any abnormal activity and the usual kind of things. And eventually, whatever happens, we take a risk-based approach. Even assuming that there has been a particular event or a breach, we look at what kind of risk that poses. So basically, to answer your question, we divide the problem into two halves. One is a whole information management approach, which determines how much of the petabytes of information we collect is really useful for warfighting. And the second part is taking a risk-based, intelligence-driven approach to ensuring insider threat is managed properly and the right kind of access is provided to the right kind of people.
Insider threats are arguably the biggest challenge that we have nowadays. A lot of times we talk about nation states, or we talk about organized crime, but at the end of the day, insiders have the greatest access to the greatest amount of data, and it's easy for them to be able to get to it. So the key is a multi-layered approach. What you do is you try to focus on specific behaviors that these individuals would enact to potentially perpetrate this crime. And then what you do is you try to highlight what those key things are based on a behavioral analysis to be able to use those as triggers. And then of course you have to use the standard security controls such as access monitoring. You have to have good training and awareness of your employees so that they can identify when people are acting just a little bit suspicious. And so if you tie all these things together, it can effectively be able to identify and potentially remediate these types of threats.
Yeah, so device fragmentation has been a big problem for any digital transformation initiative. There's been people bringing devices from home, and corporates giving devices that are managed or unmanaged, depending on the level of access to applications that you need to have. There's a whole heap of problems that come in. Obviously, there's vulnerabilities that certain devices have that others don't, but it's really hard for someone to enforce a particular type of device. So you end up with an environment where you can have anything and everything inside the same environment. So whenever you're trying to deliver any new digital initiative, there's always the problem of what are you delivering that to, and what are the risks of actually having a potential problem or a vulnerability in a particular device when you're just trying to get a digital initiative through.
Yeah, this is a tough one. I view it as cross-contamination. You can be the healthiest patient in the world, but if you come in contact with someone with a chicken pox, you haven't had it before, then you're probably going to be contaminated and be infected by it. So you have to take that same type of approach from an organizational standpoint. Every time we set up these interconnectivities with third parties, customers, whomever, we're taking on the risk of their environments not being secure and it crossing over into our environments and potentially contaminating it. So what you have to do is go through a thorough process, and it's multi-pronged. First, to be able to validate what the security is on the other side of the connection, so with the third parties. The second component is making sure that once that connectivity lands in your environment, that it's segmented off so that they don't have unfettered access across all of the high-risk areas of your environment. Then the final piece is making sure that you are enabling meaningful identity and access management controls so that the individuals on the other end of that connection are restricted in terms of what they can do and which systems they can actually operate on by virtue of the privileged access that you're able to provide them. So if you use the multi-pronged approach and you continue to do assessments and evaluations on an ongoing basis, you'll be able to help manage that risk. Of course, the best answer is always to eliminate those connections altogether. That's not always a practical solution.
So I think what's really interesting, I spent the last sort of 20 years in higher education, both as an IT professional leader and as an educator. I think there is this assumption, this idea of digital natives, and the assumption that kids coming into the world of cyber now know what to do and they know how to keep themselves safe and they are digitally aware, and that's just not my experience. I've just come across a situation across all of my peers in Australia in higher education, really battling with students handing over their credentials to third parties for apps that they find useful. So they're getting into the habit of handing over their credentials as part of their new normal. So we really need to do more to educate the next generation of business professionals so that they keep our data safe, keep their data safe. In my own organisation, I've introduced the slogan that if you safeguard our data, you safeguard our reputation. And I think that's probably one of the most important things to get across to young people, is if you safeguard your data, you're safeguarding your reputation.
First of all, thanks for having me. This is the first ADAPT event that I've been to, Cyber Edge. It's been a great day. I think first and foremost, the promoters and the organisers are certainly very passionate about cybersecurity, which has been very evident leading up to the event and within the event today itself. And I think there's a great mix of people here, so a lot of industry peers and vendors as well. But also, probably most importantly, a great speaker lineup, both locally and internationally.